Andrew Jackson once declared, "I was born for the storm. Calm does not suit me." And throughout his life, Jackson was no stranger to close calls. The scrappy president from Tennessee had been a boy when the Revolutionary War broke out, and he cut his teeth fighting against the British. When he was captured in 1781, a British soldier slashed him for refusing to shine his boots, giving Jackson scars on his hand and face that he bore for the rest of his life. As an adult, Jackson survived a duel that left him with a bullet in his chest, and he was once shot so badly during a Nashville street brawl that he almost lost one of his arms. Nothing quite compared, however, to the moment that President Andrew Jackson survived an assassination attempt in Washington, D.C. on January 30th, 1835. At that point, no U.S. president had ever been the target of an assassination attempt before, but Andrew Jackson was unlike any other president in American history. Though he'd become a hero during the War of 1812, Jackson was a deeply polarizing figure from the start. In the election of 1824, the politically inexperienced and uneducated Jackson cut a different figure than his competitors, including John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State, and the son of a former president, John Adams. Despite this, Jackson ran a surprisingly popular campaign and only lost the race to Adams when it was thrown to the House of Representatives after none of the candidates garnered a majority of the electoral vote. Jackson accused Adams of striking a corrupt bargain and promptly ran again in 1828. This time, he won, to the abject horror of many in the political establishment. As president, Jackson pursued a number of divisive policies, from removing high-ranking government officials who he claimed were corrupt and replacing them with his supporters, to his opposition to rechartering the Second Bank of the United States. Many of Jackson's policies were so controversial, in fact, that his detractors, led by Kentucky Senator Henry Clay, formed a new political party. They called themselves the Whigs, which prompted a direct comparison to the English anti-monarchy party of the same name. It also prompted a comparison between King George III of Britain, the hated British monarch who'd ruled during the Revolutionary War, and Andrew Jackson, who was dubbed King Andrew by his opponents. With political vitriol swirling in the air, Andrew Jackson became the obsession of a mentally disturbed house painter named Richard Lawrence, who took it upon himself to kill the 67-year-old president on a cold January day in Washington, D.C. But though Lawrence was armed with 2 pistols and Jackson only with a cane, the president survived. This is the story of the assassination attempt against Andrew Jackson and how the president somehow beat the odds, yet again, to live another day. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Faraga.
And I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
Today, we'll be discussing the failed shooting of Andrew Jackson in 1835, the first presidential assassination attempt in U.S. history. So do you know much about this story? Or?
I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even look at this outline.
Fantastic. I love that. Okay, that's cool. So it's going to sound kind of dry, but we're starting with the Second Bank of the United States. That's where the story starts.
Okay. I mean...
All right.
The Second Bank.
Yeah. So basically what happened was in have you seen Hamilton, the musical?
No, I have not.
Wow. I think you're the only person
I was going to say,
on Earth.
I'm the only person at this point who has not seen Hamilton.
It's on Disney Plus now. Anyway, this is a plot point in the play, but Alexander Hamilton pushes to have a national bank in the 1790s, and so the country adopts one. This is not a popular idea with people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who are, Hamilton's enemies. So Congress, these Jefferson and Madison come into power and the charter is expired in 1811. But then the War of 1812 happens and people start realizing that maybe the bank actually was important. It issued currency, it oversaw the opening of new branches, it moved money around the country. So
before this, they just had local banks, smaller, or the just banks weren't a thing?
Their banks were a thing. This was a way of national, having one national bank.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Because before, the Revolutionary War, all the colonies had their own currency and stuff. So this was a way of nationalizing an institution.
I actually did not know that.
Yeah.
That they all had their own currency. That's crazy, because even I was writing about the Mongol Empire the other day, and even they had a consistent currency, like a paper currency that they used.
Well, with the colonies, a lot of people living in like Virginia thought of Virginia as like its own separate thing. So that this bank came into existence, and then they issued this new charter for it in 1816, which was a little bit rocky at first, but things had kind of smoothed out by the 1820s. And this is around the time that Andrew Jackson is starting to gain power. And Jackson comes out as being like super against the bank, which is sort of a shocking position to take. He says it's unconstitutional. This concentration of financial power is bad for liberty, and it gives the wealthiest Americans the most power. So Jackson comes into power in 1828, and when it comes up, the charter is about to expire. So Congress passes a bill to recharter the bank, and Jackson vetoes it. This is like shocking to his opponents, especially because it's about to be an election. They thought this was just too controversial of a stance to take. So Jackson does this thing, and then he takes things a step further after he wins the election in 1828, and he takes the federal deposits out of the bank. Congress says this is an overreach of executive power, and the Senate censures him, which doesn't really mean much. It's just basically a formal reprimand.
Yeah, a little slap on the wrist, like, don't do that.
Yeah, but this is all, a very public political battle, and if you were an American in the day, you would know this was happening. And it sort of filters down to this guy named Richard Lawrence, who is a mentally disturbed house painter. Yeah.
What a descriptor.
He was born in England, and he moves to Washington, D.C. in 1812. And so, yes, he's a house painter. And there's some theories that he started having these delusions because of these toxic chemicals in the paint that he was around all day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But wherever this came from, by the 1830s, a lot of these delusions had to do with Andrew Jackson. He believed that Jackson had killed his father, that Lawrence was the king of England.
Oh, no.
He thought he was Richard III, who we've talked about as the guy from Humpty Dumpty,
right.
The possible inspiration. And he believed that he wasn't receiving payments for his estates because Andrew Jackson had opposed the rechartering of the bank. Yeah.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. And it kind of reminded me, we talked about in the assassination attempt of Theodore Roosevelt, his assassin, John Schrank, was also sort of influenced by political dialogues of the day, or at least Theodore Roosevelt thought he was.
Right. But at least in that case, though, it was a little bit more focused. He was just like, hey, what was it? Grant in his head was telling him to kill Teddy Roosevelt. McKinley was telling him to. So at least he was like, he had a very specific, like, McKinley told me to kill Roosevelt. I'm going to do that. This guy is like, Richard Lawrence has like a lot going on.
He's a lot going on. Yeah. But I know that like Theodore Roosevelt afterwards, he like blamed the poisonous political atmosphere for the violence. But in any case, then one of Andrew Jackson's main opponents, who's actually his former vice president, John Calhoun, gives a speech in the Senate, and he says that Andrew Jackson is a Caesar who ought to have a Brutus.
Oh, God.
Fighting words.
Man.
Yeah.
I don't know. That seems like that's inciting violence. That is not...
Right.
Whew.
There's no proof that Richard Lawrence heard this speech. But shortly thereafter, a witness hears him say, "I'll be damned if I don't do it." And then he gets himself 2 pistols and goes to find Andrew Jackson.
No, man, he's going full gunslinger with it, one on each hip.
So now this brings us now to January 30th, 1835. So Andrew Jackson is attending a funeral at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And as he's leaving the building, Lawrence appears from the crowd. This is the 1830s. There's no Secret Service around the president or anything. So Lawrence takes his pistol, points it at Jackson, he fires, and it goes off. Smoke fills the air, but the powder doesn't ignite. So basically the gun has misfired. Jackson, he's 67 years old, then raises his cane and charges at Lawrence. Lawrence then pulls out his second pistol, points it, fires it, and it also misfires. Jackson shouts, let me alone, I know where this came from." And then he starts clobbering Lawrence with his cane until Lawrence is subdued by bystanders, including Davy Crockett of,
wow, yeah,
the American frontier and everything. A man who witnesses the assassination says that Jackson's response was gallant, and the president was the coolest man on the ground. Although as Jackson's men surrounded him, the president supposedly yelled, "Stand back, gentlemen, I shall be stabbed by some unseen hand."
like basically just like, hey, don't come in here and make it worse.
Yeah, or there may be still an assassin in the midst. The crazy part about this is that afterwards, Lawrence's guns are examined and they're both found to be in perfect working order. One of the senators who was part of this examination, I guess, said they fired afterward without fail, carrying their bullets true and driving them through inch bores at 30 feet. Which is insane. In fact, It's so insane that it was later determined the likelihood of both pistols misfiring was 125,000 to 1.
Yeah, that's like a divine intervention there. That's crazy.
Exactly. I mean, the letter writer I just mentioned wrote that he believed a special providence saved the old hero's life, which is also what Jackson thought.
I mean, I'm not a religious man, but if I were, that would be a pretty good sign that
someone was watching out for you.
Someone's got your back.
Right. I think after Reagan's assassination attempt, he also believed that God had saved him. I mean, I guess if you survive a thing like that, that thought might enter your mind.
Yeah.
Jackson, in addition to believing that God had saved him, believed that his political opponents had arranged this whole thing and hired Lawrence to kill him. And he was a little bit insane about it. One observer of the aftermath said, before 2 hours were over, the name of almost every eminent politician was mixed up with that of that poor maniac who caused the uproar. And Jackson did not believe that Richard Lawrence was insane at all. He thought he, had been hired.
Right.
Calhoun was forced to defend himself on the Senate floor, the guy who said the Brutus comment. And another politician named George Poindexter was also accused of hiring Lawrence to kill Jackson, but there's no evidence that was actually happening. At his trial, it became pretty clear to anyone watching that Lawrence was very insane. He dressed like royalty and scolded the jury for attempting to pass judgment on him as commoners commenting on royalty. He said, "It is for me, gentlemen, to pass upon you and not you upon me." Yeah.
And we're not that far removed at this point from the Revolutionary War.
No, not really. He's British, though.
That makes it worse.
He spends the rest of his life in an insane asylum. And Jackson, at the end of his presidency, asks if he has any regrets. And he remarks, in the intro I mentioned, he has another opponent named Henry Clay. And Jackson says, "Yes, I regret I was unable to shoot Henry Clay or hang John C. Calhoun." Full stop.
Wow. God.
He was a guy.
Yeah, you think politics these days are cutthroat or some of the things they say are crazy, but
oh yeah, Jackson, this whole era was really
imagine Biden leaving office and they're like, "Do you have any regrets about your presidency?" And he's like, "Yeah, I wish I could have killed Trump while I was in there." It's jeez, man.
Yeah, exactly. I guess this is an era though where there's duels and
sure, yeah,
whatnot.
It was very gentlemanly to stare a man in the eye and shoot him from across the street.
Andrew Jackson was in a duel and he carried a bullet in his chest the rest of his life.
Wow.
Yeah. I know he was kind of a badass. He did some pretty horrible things during his presidency. Most of them did, but he got in a lot of scraps and often came out the victor.
What was the end result of all the bank stuff? I mean, obviously, we still have
no national bank. I mean, we have banks. There's no national American bank.
Apparently, I know nothing about banking and how that works. I just assumed there was.
I don't know much about it either. I know there's the Federal Reserve, but that's a different thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yet there's a bank company called First National Bank, but they're privately owned.
And there's Bank of America, you know. But
oh man, wow, that's so confusing.
Anything about bank stuff and financial stuff in American history, inflation, or I'm always I don't understand.
It gets hard to follow at a certain point unless you're really knowledgeable about finances, I guess. But I was talking to my girlfriend's dad about the transition from gold-backed income to kind of just where we're at now with a credit system. I was like, yeah, do we even still do the gold thing? He's like, well, you can go to a bank and get gold. And I was like, no, I'm aware of that, but does the amount of gold anywhere actually matter anymore?
You can go to a bank and get gold?
Apparently.
Wow. I mean, it's all sort of made up. I mean, granted, I've taken one econ class and I didn't do very well in it, but when I was in the class, I was like, this is all, we just made up these rules / we don't understand how they work.
Yeah, we went from bartering, which was hey, I'll give you 3 loaves of bread for a slice of your cow. Then we can both eat because I make bread and you own a cow. And then somehow that became this here's 3 gold pieces for a jug of milk.
Yeah.
And it was these things that have no actual use that we've just
all kinda
assigned
made
value
up.
to. Now we literally just have like ones and zeros.
Mhm.
You scan something and it goes beep boop boop. Okay, you have less ones and zeros in your digital bank vault. It's like,
I mean,
sure.
isn't the same thing with like Bitcoin? Someone is like, this is worth something, and now it is.
Yeah, kinda. Yeah. It used to be like, I think one Bitcoin's like $20,000.
Wow.
I also
See, and I'm
read a
like,
story
why?
about
I
a
don't
guy who
understand.
was like Bitcoin mining on his PC. And then
Uh-huh.
either the PC got damaged or like just randomly thrown away or something like that. But because Bitcoin, I don't know if it still is, but at the time it was, you had to store it locally. So if something happened to your hard drive, it was gone.
Wow.
So his computer like got thrown out, and he was like, that was like 100,000 Bitcoin that I just lost.
Damn, that's really horrible.
Yeah, I think now there's like systems to track it, but I don't know. I don't.
Hmm.
I'm not crypto. I don't have the crypto mindset.
I'm not either. I prefer presidential history, I guess. But yeah. So anyway, it's kind of a crazy story, and there obviously were other assassination attempts in American history, but this was the first one, and it was a pretty crazy story. Like,
Yeah,
that these guns misfired. I love the detail about Jackson clobbering this guy with his cane.
Yeah.
He's almost 70 years old.
Right. It does feel, the word clobbering especially does feel very like old man just kind of waving his cane at somebody.
Yeah.
Just like,
So anyway, that's the first half of this episode. And then, as we did last week, we're now doing a little segue into a history happy hour segment for our members.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're a regular listener, thanks for listening to this episode. Be sure to check out allthat'sinteresting.com, where we have articles about everything we cover on this show, including the assassination attempt on Andrew Jackson, and much, much more. Very exciting stuff coming soon as well.
Mm-hmm.
Be sure to check us out on social media, on Instagram at History Uncovered Podcast, on TikTok at Real History Uncovered, and you might already be listening to this on YouTube, or you might not be, but we're on YouTube as well with all the episodes and shorts and stuff up there. And if you want to become a member, head on over to alltit'sinteresting.com/membership. And that's how you'll get the super exclusive second part of this episode.
Yeah.
Which is just for our members, which is, our little history happy hour segment that we're kind of retooling it a little bit here. So if you want to hear that, if you want to hear what we've been covering in the news lately and hear a little bit about some historic anniversaries, consider becoming a member. Help us out. It means a lot.